Alright guys, this is going to be a little workflow video showing you guys how to load up a site in Dataview and do your field QC before you submit the site to the processing department. So basically I'm assuming that you've got your site folder organized, that it's saved to the C drive, Dataview 16 sites folder, and if that's the case, when you first launch Field Dataview, it should show up in this list. You'll notice I have a whole lot of sites listed out here. Hopefully your guys' computer will be a little less busy with extra sites loaded up, but you should be able to just scroll down and find it listed alphabetically here. In this case, I'm just going to use this first site here, this Aux Sable Creek site, as the example. You'll want to look over here and just check that all of these make sense. This is stuff that you can look on the hub for, so you should be able to see that the units are set up correctly, what zone it is in. If you're in Canada, you might be working in a UTM zone, so just check off, make sure that those two items are correct. Whether the pipe is easting or northing is just dependent on whether the pipe sits in a more west to east orientation or if it crosses the river in a more south to north orientation. Obviously, many of our pipes kind of cross at an angle, so you just use your best interpretation of the site to choose that. And it's not really that big a deal if you get it wrong. It's something we can pretty easily correct after the fact. So just do your best interpretation of how you think that pipe sits. And then for the geoid, again, this should be listed out in the hub for you, but also it will automatically be selected. So if you're in the US, 99.9% of the time you're going to be using that geoid 18, and then in Canada we're going to be using the HT2 geoid, but that should happen automatically. You still want to give it a glance and just make sure everything looks correct there. This checkbox here is to help you guys decide whether you want to import all of your FieldSense View data files as basically combined into one file per pipe. So if you have maybe 3 different pulled data files where you were doing pulled locate on the western shoreline, a different file in the waterway, and a different file on the eastern shoreline. To simplify things, you can just combine those all into one file on import. That way you don't have a bunch of extra files in the list. But if for some reason you want to view them all separately, you can uncheck that. That can be helpful if you're worried that there's maybe an offset issue in one of the files, or if you locate it on a couple different frequencies and you want to be able to compare them all separately pretty easily. But I would say the vast majority of the time, you can just leave that checked. And then you'll go ahead and hit Start New Session here. You might see an error pop up here or warnings, and it's really imperative that you guys read this text because we add these in here to help us flag things for you guys. In this case, at least one of the topo CSV files is missing rod, height, time, or date information, and that information is really crucial to the data department so we can accurately investigate if there's a rod height issue, if some of the data on any given day was collected with maybe a different base setup. So make sure you're exporting your Carlson CSV files with all of that information. And if you see this pop up, it's just a warning saying, hey, some of that information is missing. And that can kind of help you make a determination for the next project. Maybe you need to go into your settings and fiddle with some things, or it could just be a different export setting. So always read this and make sure that you're flagging it for yourself so that moving forward you guys get it right on your sites. But in this case, you can just say OK, and it'll automatically load up all of the data that you had in that site folder already. So it will import each of the pipes in the site and the topo and features. In this case, we've got 2 lines for this crossing, the mainline 100, the mainline loop 100, and then we have our topo and features here as well. So they're automatically grouped just based off of the folder structure that you saved the files to in your site folder. It's great to just take a moment and make sure everything looks correct just at a first glance. So for example, if you know that the loop line is the furthest north line, you maybe want to make sure, hey, is that loading correctly? So in this case, that is the north line. So if things don't look quite right here to you, you can go back to your folder structure and rearrange the files so that everything imports correctly here. You'll also notice that Dataview does some initial processing for you. So these notes here on the side will kind of tell you what each file is. We've got the raw data imported as one FSV poll file. So it's going to show up as these light gray points. The window at the bottom is the profile view, and the window at the top is your plan view. And you again can kind of just get a sense of how the data looks at a quick glance. You can also look at this auto filtered data set. That's just going to have some basic filters applied. This will help kind of clear out anything that's like super extraneous. It's not going to filter out everything, but it might help if there's like a few crazy outlier points that are making it hard to visualize the raw file. But it's always important to do your own really basic filters as well, and it's really easy to do that. You basically want to select all of the locate for each line. So there's two ways to do that. You can use the hotkey Control A to select all, or you can just click and drag to select the points, which works in either window to select points. Down here, you really don't have to worry too much about these values. This is something that we do in the processing department in order to really dial down the data and get things as accurate as possible. But you do want to do just some basic filters to make sure nothing's too crazy. The big one is to make sure that we have really good fixed coverage. So in this case, I would want to uncheck the DGPS data and just make sure that you still have a lot of black data. So it's going to turn anything red that is getting filtered out. And if it helps you visually, you can go ahead and just delete those points out and see, okay, this is what I've got that's actually fixed. Same thing for kind of confidence levels. I know you guys should be familiar with these HSDV or VSDV terms since you see those while you're locating. The big thing is just making sure we've got pretty decent vertical confidence values. You might have some crazy outliers. So in this case, we've got a few of these points that are sitting here with wildly high confidence levels. We want to lower those just to see what the actual data set looks like. So you can kind of drag that down and it'll filter things out. You can also just look at the data here. We've got these pink dashes indicating the confidence levels. So they're not super tight, but they're not terrible. They get tighter over here. And that kind of just gives you a sense of the confidence, the accuracy of the data that you're looking at. And one really helpful thing that Field Dataview does for you is also provides this auto condensed file. So it's just going to take the auto filtered data and condense each one of these clusters into one average point, which allows you to see the visualization of the ground profile over the pipe. It might get a little wonky, like right here we've got these points that are being condensed kind of erroneously from the filtered point cloud just because it gets a little spread out here, and that's okay. It's really not that important for you to clean that up or be too worried about that. We'll take care of that when we process the site. It's really just to give you some context so you can see generally how deep the pipe is and what's going on at the crossing. So in this case, we've got a vertical gap size here of 5 feet. So you know that over here the pipe is buried by more than, in this case, about 10 feet or so. So these confidence levels don't concern me at that depth. And you can see over here where the pipe's buried a little more shallowly, we've got pretty good confidence levels. So you just want to make sure that your confidence margins aren't sitting above the ground or anything real crazy, because that's something you'd want to flag for the data department if anything looks really weird and you see pretty poor accuracies. You want to do that for both pipes. Should just be a couple minutes for each one just to give you a sense, is everything in fix? So we can select it all. Yep, everything's in fixed here. So we've got nice consistent coverage for the whole crossing. Nothing looks too wonky, no crazy confidence levels on this one. So overall, pretty straightforward crossing with the two pipes side by side here. Then you also just want to take a second and look at your topo and features. Make sure nothing looks too crazy on that front. Make sure you've got good coverage of the scope here. And nice dense bathymetry in the waterway. It can help to kind of turn on your pipes and make sure you've got good coverage over the lines. In this case, since it was all pulled locate, we know we have really good depth of cover readings for each of these clusters. So I'm a little less concerned with there being a strong blanket of bathymetry over the line. But if this line was located from the kayak, we'd want to make sure we had nice single beam coverage back and forth right over the pipe. So that's always something you want to look at before you leave the site, and just make sure you've got really good coverage over the lines. We also can look over here and just make sure there's not a lot of float points. In this case, this whole data set is in either fixed or fixed plus. The only no status point is the base, since that was obviously recorded without an RTK connection. So this site looks pretty perfect to me. Really great topo and features coverage, no float points, nice solid locate for both pipes, full scope coverage. So pretty standard and basic here. Should only take you a few minutes to really QC this. You can also just turn everything on and make sure that it's all showing up in the right spot, that the lines are showing up where the topo and features are located, that nothing's getting drawn, way far away from the rest of the crossing. And also just make sure that the ground profile generally seems to be in line with topo and features. Obviously here, you're looking at it as just a slice from the side, so it's all right if you don't have like a sense of point to point how perfectly it aligns. But you can kind of tell, oh, is our ground line generally where it's supposed to be, or is it sitting like way higher or way lower than the rest of the data set? And that can be something that we can catch and fix in the processing department, but it definitely helps us if you flag that right away, so we can look into it and make sure it's not something egregious that you guys would have to go back to the site to correct. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and start the process for delivering the site. You can also do a quick check and just make sure that the KMZ is loading correctly. So in this case, you can run a normal KMZ or a sparse KMZ operation here, and that'll launch the site up in Google Earth. And just again, make sure it's showing up in the right location. Clearly this one is plotted correctly, so everything looks pretty straightforward there. The only difference with the sparse KMZ is it's just going to make fewer points. For the most part, you don't have to worry about that, but if you do have a crossing that has really dense single beam data, it might make your computer run really slow if you try to make a KMZ of every single point. So you can run a sparse KMZ if you are just trying to get a quick sense of where your data sits in relation to the Google Earth imagery. So you can go ahead and shift to delivery mode here. So once you feel good about everything in your site folder, all the data you've QC'd, go ahead and click this deliver button. It'll pop up this warning, which basically says that once you hit continue, you kind of want to just sit back and let this process. Don't touch your mouse or keyboard, because it's going to set up some screenshots and take those automatically. So we'll go ahead and say continue. And very quickly, it should generate a few screenshots. The first one will just be a screenshot of the full coverage of the site. The next one should be everything in that first pipe folder, and so on. So a screenshot of each line. This helps so that if someone else wants to just pull up the site and do a quick QC after the fact behind you guys, it's really easy for us to see if anything wonky is going on that maybe you guys didn't catch when you were doing your own QC. If everything looks good there, you can go ahead and hit generate coverage KMZ. And that'll automatically generate a KMZ formatted correctly for the hub coverage KMZ. And this also gives you a chance to just look and check your rod height. So in this case, like I said, one of the CSV's files imported here was missing the rod heights for quite a few points. So that should be a red flag. Again, we really need that information for every point if possible. So we want to make sure you're recording that and exporting that information. But down here, it also has the rod heights listed for these points, 6.67. So just take a glance at this, and if anything looks really weird, that's something you want to flag for us as well. So if you were to see that all of your points were maybe taken with a 2.2 foot offset, like how you would normally have it for single beam props, but someone accidentally left the rod the same offset in Carlson and proceeded to collect the rest of the topo coverage, that would be something that you could call out to us so we know we need to correct all of your topo points. It's really helpful. Hopefully that's something we would catch as well. But since you guys were out in the field, you know what you were doing, you know what your rod heights were set to, you're going to be the best at catching if those are wrong. So always take a second and view that before you move on. But you can just say continue. And it's going to do the rest for you. So it's going to zip your site folder. It's going to upload the coverage KMZ. It's really going to take care of everything for you here. You just got to let it run. Sometimes it might take a bit, but shouldn't be too long. And this way you know that whatever you just QC'd is what's getting automatically uploaded to the hub. So you don't have to worry so much about accidentally leaving out data. Everything that was imported here is automatically going to end up exactly where it was supposed to be. So yeah, once that finishes uploading, the percentage will go away, everything will just go back to the normal view, and you're pretty much good to go. You can just close out and save your data view window and go to the hub and finish getting everything submitted.